How do we grow this influence of black leaders, men and women, that can represent our industry inside the ANC, inside the policy-making structures?
Get to grips with the digital environment, put together best practices, what works and what doesn't, very importantly.
In the project that we're doing in Chatlat, we've created a linking bridge between those two little areas there. So it becomes a matter of just 10 minutes walk from one side to the other.
So my message to our CEOs and those chief investment officers is, where at the end of the day do you want to see your role?
So by treating all of our water back to a stage where we can bring it back into the process, we're in effect saving around about 35% of our water usage on site.
Welcome to greeneconomy.tv. I'm your host and facilitator, Byron McDonald. It's another episode of The Circular Show. And our regular guest, Chris Whyte, Director of the African Circular Economy Network. And he will be in conversation with the intelligent student, Nolwazi Mbhele. But before I go ahead, as I say each show, greeneconomy.tv provide insight and intelligence on all sustainability-related matters. So let's invite on our guests. Hey Nolwazi, hi Chris, how are you doing?
Hi Brian.
Hi Brian. Everyone well?
Excellent. Nolwazi, it's today your day. It's your showtime. Everybody knows you're heading the shows and you have everything. We know you got all those questions prepared, like every curious student has. And today we're talking about energy in the circular economy. So Nolwazi, I'll leave it to you to start off and ask your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi Chris.
Hey Nolwazi.
Are you good?
Always good.
Good. Before we start on this energy and circular economy, may you please explain to the viewers what it is exactly?
What energy is? It's what happens. So the concept around energy and the circular economy is understanding that the way we've done things in the past is not realistic for the future. So one of the biggest problems that we face globally is access to energy, but access to clean energy. And if you look at the restrictions that are being put onto the European Union at the moment in terms of their carbon emissions, and looking at making sure that they are compliant with regards to emission standards, they've got to look very carefully at what's happening. And of course, everyone says, well, solar and wind are the solution to everything. Well, unfortunately, they're not. So solar and wind are a key requirement, but the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. And the storage of energy is an expensive option. So if we look at existing energy transmission, currently what we have is massive transmission grids that are extending right across our landscape. They're visually nasty, but they're also inefficient. And energy transmission grids can only carry a certain amount of energy. You can't push different levels of energy through a transmission grid at different times. So what happens is that we have peak times. So when everyone's having their shower in the morning or when everyone's getting home and cooking and dinner at night, we have peak times when our energy is peaked at a much higher level than it is throughout the day. So we need to provide for base load. We need to provide for peak load. So it's a complicated thing to make sure that we look at the entire energy mix. And that really means that we need to look at it from two perspectives. One, what are the renewable and alternative options for energy? And two, what are the options in terms of transitioning from massive grid applications to microgrid applications, where we are able to unlock innovation, technology, and local development in terms of meeting our energy demands?
Okay. So in South Africa, I know we're still way far in implementing renewable energies, but what would you say are the biggest challenges in South Africa?
Very simply, monopolization. We have a system where we have one entity that is in control of our futures. As I said in a previous chat, I think we have an installed energy capacity of about 42,000 megawatts. The reality is that only about 28,000 megawatts of that works, and I think currently it's probably about 23,000 megawatts. So we have an aging infrastructure. The issue is also that we have an infrastructure that is in control of the pricing. And that is also another problem. There is no competition in the market. But we are seeing moves. So the government's making the right moves very slowly. But we are starting to see a transition of our energy mix, including wind and solar and a little bit of hydro. But the reality is that there are vested interests in terms of keeping the bulk of the energy requirements based on existing infrastructure and carbon unfriendly systems. Let's put it that way. So we've got to look at understanding the issue from a regulatory and monopolized perspective, and we also need to understand that provides challenges because organizations are battling, businesses, manufacturers, retailers. When the lights go out, we don't make money. And the simple reality is that we need to look at creating self-sufficiency. We need to be able to be given the opportunity to look at innovative technologies and applications to secure our own energy mix, and we need to be able to do that in a way where we can then achieve sustainability goals and circular economy goals in doing so. So it's complicated, but it's not undoable.
Okay, but then hi Gordon.
Hey Gordon.
Hi there. How are you guys doing? Great to see you on the show. And just a question from my side. I was listening in to the question and picking up on your point there, Chris, about decentralization. You will see that in the news recently, the Department of Energy and through NERSA, they expanded the size of projects that can be, let's say, energy generation projects that can be undertaken for own use, from 1 megawatt to 10 megawatts, and now there's a big argument that should be pushed to 50 megawatts. What is your view on that, and to what extent does that type of expansion of the ability of customers to generate for own use play into this circularity that you're referring to, or that's which is required in the energy sector?
There's a lot of issues in terms of the discussion. I think it's Minister Gwede Matashi who is pushing at last from the 1 megawatt limit to a 10 megawatt limit, and again saying that this has been discussed with the energy sector with over 10,000 people. He didn't ask me, and I know there's a few other people he didn't ask, so I'm not sure which 10,000 people he did ask. But we need to look at making it bigger. And again, looking at energy is often an issue of scales of economy. So whilst there are some fantastic applications and innovations in terms of small scale energy applications from sort of anything from 50 kilowatts up to a megawatt, when you start looking at the bigger energy mixes, scales of economy start to make sense. So if you're looking at massive biomass or gasification or pyrolysis or other applications at scale, it makes sense because it brings down the unit cost of your energy per kilowatt hour. So the question really from industry is that our big industries are suffering, and we are losing our global competitiveness because of that. Whether you're in the automotive sector or the steel sector or agricultural production, there are massive energy requirements. And the simple reality is that we need to be given the ability as business to master our own futures. And there should be guidelines in place in terms of how to do that and to do it properly within a circular economy and within a sort of sustainable application. But it's that 10 to 50 is really a scale of economy issue. We need to look at the reality that already we have seen Stellenbosch has come forward saying that they are looking to become independent of Eskom by 2030. And I think Johannesburg has recently come up with the same opportunity. They're saying we want to become energy independent, we want to produce our own energy. And that does allow for massive innovation. The opportunity in terms of looking at alternative and renewable energy applications is far cheaper than what we're looking at through coal energy and the aged infrastructure from Eskom. And the simple reality is that as a country, in terms of our agreements, our signed agreements to the Paris Climate Agreement, our signed agreements in terms of the UNFCCC, in terms of our low carbon development and our carbon emissions, we shouldn't be promoting these sort of fossil fuel type applications. We need to be decarbonizing our economy. And the private sector is the sector that's going to be able to drive that. Government's not going to be able to drive that. Government needs to open the doors. Government should become an enabler and not a manager.
Yes, my next question actually was going to be about how can companies move from non-renewable energies to renewable energy?
It depends on each application. So the problem that we have at the moment, largely, is that the transmission grid, we're all tied into the transmission grid. So we have been happily supporting Eskom for the last, 80, 90 years, and we rely heavily on their transmission grid. And effectively, they control that, and nobody's allowed to tap into the grid without their say-so or without them manipulating the pricing. So that becomes a problem. There's also an issue in terms of understanding the existing grid, whether one is looking at grid tied or off grid. If one's looking at grid tied, you need to understand the existing transmission. You cannot have solar power pumping energy back into the grid or alternative energy pumping back into the grid if the grid has been switched off by Eskom for maintenance in a particular area and they don't know there's energy coming the other way. That's going to cause problems. So a few people are going to get fried. So we've got to look very carefully at the gridded versus non-gridded applications. But the opportunity in terms of looking at waste to energy from a small, medium to large scale is a massive, massive opportunity. But we also need to look at the simple fact that our landfill sites are filling up, and yet we're filling them full of high CV or high calorific value type products that we're not recycling. So if we're not recycling them, let's rather convert them into energy. Yes, it's not fully circular, but it's a step in the right direction. It starts putting infrastructure and systems into place that allow us to transition to a more circular economy. But we need to be able to give people the ability to manage that themselves. And we're helping organizations at the moment, some of which in the non-manufacturing sector, if you look at the retail space, solar is the way to go. You've got the roof space, put on the solar. If you need some lights at night, then you can do either grid tied or non-grid tied, and you can either use batteries or you don't use batteries. There's many different ways to do it. And the beauty of it is that because of the cost of solar and other applications being far less than our Eskom applications or what we buy, not necessarily directly from Eskom, but maybe through our municipalities who add their percentage onto it as well, is that the opportunity for that is that we can then get very innovative financing to cover the cost of the capex of doing that, which means that instead of somebody selling a technology or an application to a client, they would be selling energy at a reduced rate, less than Eskom. And that means that the client doesn't have to cover the millions in terms of capex for the product, because that's properly financed over a 20-year period. And instead, you're paying for energy and you have no capital exposure. That's a very exciting opportunity for South Africa. But that's also a very daunting prospect for Eskom. If everyone goes that way, Eskom doesn't have a future.
Gordon, do you have a question?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting topic, and I also think it's quite complex too, isn't it? I mean, for example, you're talking now about financed energy solutions, essentially private PPAs with IPPs or with energy services companies. And one of the big challenges there is, in order to meet, or in order for the IPP tariff to be in the region of the ESCOM or the city tariff, what's required is a very long PPA. So one's talking 15 to 20 years. And that's a major impediment to the rollout of these projects, isn't it? Because companies don't actually think that far ahead. I mean, they really don't know what they're going to be doing with their space, with their rooftop, with their parking space, in 10, 12, 15, let alone 20 years' time. How do we marry this need for these big investments that need to be amortized over long periods of time with a relatively short to medium term view of many of our companies?
Well, we need to put that into perspective, Gordon. The reality is that you might be working with numbers that may be a bit outdated. Solar at the moment, if you look at some of these installations that we're developing, you're talking about a return on investment of 4 to 5 years. On some of the alternative power generation, you're talking about a payback period of under 2 years. The issue is always going to be if you are a tenant in a building, one's then got to rather work with the opportunity of the landowner, and the landowner then becomes the seller of the electricity, and they can make a profit out of it as well. Again, making sure that it doesn't encumber the tenant to a higher rate than they would pay through the conventional transmission grid. So there are many different ways of unpacking it. The application in terms of the long-term financing is not really an issue. If you look at solar, I mean, solar is designed to last for 25, 30 years before it needs to be replaced. The opportunity is realistically, if you look at the way that energy is increasing in price at an annual level, I mean, our latest increase of 15.3% or whatever it was is just ridiculous. So the reality is the other prices are coming down at similar rates on an annual basis. So do you tie yourself into a dirty, unsustainable future, or do you look at making sure that you become self-reliant and understand it from that perspective? Now, I'll give you one example, and I won't mention names because I might get shot. Take the automotive sector, for example. There's one automotive sector that if they are without power for a day's production, they lose 50, 60 million rand. That's the level of impact that not having energy has. So if you take not just the load shedding, but the times that your aged infrastructure is down for 2-3 days, and you add that up and put that into your capital expenditure, it starts to make sense. So it's not just on a one-to-one basis. One's got to look at your sustainability. You've got to look at meeting your own sustainable requirements, your own low carbon applications. But being free of a grid that is unreliable is also a big plus.
So you've mentioned some of the municipalities that are looking to procure power from independent power producers. There's also a number of massive RFPs and RFQs out into the market, in the market at the moment, from large companies like Sasol and Anglo and other major mining entities, looking to procure electricity from IPPs using wheeling, where obviously the IPP puts a plant in the most ideal conditions from a sun and wind perspective, and then they plug it into the transmission lines, and the customer pulls it out on the other side. But from a circularity point of view, I mean, I'm very interested in your views on, if you were to just look at the five or four key things that companies can look at on site to achieve greater levels of circularity under the heading of energy. What would you? I mean, you've mentioned solar. Perhaps just go through summarize some of the points you've already made for us, perhaps, and just give us some ideas about how they can tackle that.
It's going to depend on the application. So I think the first thing that organizations, companies need to look at is they need to look at their energy efficiency. They need to look at their application. Been to many organizations where they have outdated lighting. They have outdated water heating applications. So one needs to look at changing to LED lighting. And the returns on investment on LED lighting are incredible if you start looking at the power that actually comes out of lights. But then also looking at your energy efficiency, variable speed drives on your equipment to drop down your peak load, looking at efficient water heating systems like heat pumps. So the first thing before one even looks at putting solar on your roof is reduce your demand. There's no point in looking at your current demand and then putting in solar to that capacity, because that's just a waste of time. So the first thing is look at energy efficiency. And we've been very bad at that. And the reason was because for a long time, we had one of the cheapest energies in the world. So we didn't. But that's becoming a big issue now. The second thing in terms of the lighting side is health and safety. We have requirements in terms of manufacturers, retailers, etc., that require a certain amount of lumens in your workspace to ensure that you provide a safe working space. And if you don't, and one of your workers cuts off a finger and somebody comes and says, but your lights are pretty bad, your guy probably couldn't see what he was doing, you're going to be in trouble. That's going to cost you a lot of money. So look at that first, then design and understand the solar application. And that solar application then needs to be understood in terms of the practice. Does it work during the day? Is it 8 hours? Is it 12 hours? Is it 24 hours? So do you need direct lighting and power during the day? Or do you need battery storage for night? Does it meet your peak load? So again, we've got to then understand the peak load. And that's also a lot of people say, oh, we'll go solar, but they've got 3 or 4 machines around the back that run on 3-phase electricity, and solar is just not going to hack it. So they've got to look at the energy mix and understand the different opportunities. But when they start to look at understanding energy, because all of us, we're all guilty of this. I mean, we get our rates bill at the end of the month, we look at it and say, bloody hell, look what we're paying for energy this month. And we pay it. But we don't look at changing the systems. Remove your geysers. You don't need geysers. There's new technology out there that doesn't need it. All of these are different applications we need to look at. But then understand from a company perspective, there are alternatives. So in the mining sector, there are great opportunities using waste products, tires, oils, coal fines, biomass that we can use to generate electricity on a baseload basis that will meet your heavy engineering requirements. And really, we need to shake ourselves free of a monopolized energy system. So we've seen some prime things come out. The new Ford plant in China, I think it is, with their expectation of going zero off the grid by 2025, which is amazing. Goldfields is looking at applications. Sasol is looking at applications, as you said. But we need to look beyond just solar and wind. We need to look at all the different applications. And we have many different solutions and technologies and applications. We need to look at waste heat. If you've got an application that's running a boiler, you could be generating electricity off of that. If you're running a kiln, you could be converting that into a miniature power plant. There are technologies and systems there's multiple of them, from steam turbine systems to organic Rankine cycles. So there's many different ways of looking at energy, and most of them are a lot greener than just plugging it up, plugging into Eskom. So people need to educate themselves as to what those opportunities are, and take advantage of them, because we cannot be held ransom to one provider. It doesn't work anywhere else in the world. You go to the UK, you can choose your provider. You can choose between 4 or 5 energy providers, and you can choose which is the greenest, which is the most stable. You can choose it on price. And then if they get too expensive, next month you can change to a new provider. We don't have that here. But we need to look at becoming energy independent, and we need to become self-sufficient.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Nolwazi?
Actually, I don't have a question, but then I do have to say thank you to Chris, because coming from a small town in Mpumalanga that produces like hectic coal, I don't know if you know Whyte. Not a lot of people actually know about renewable energy, so
Exactly.
that was very interesting to know about it. Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I mean, you mentioned a town like Witbank, and actually, there's an interesting story emerging in Witbank regarding this idea of a just transition away from fossil fuels, and there's been an expression of interest issued by the department on how to repurpose old coal-fired power stations, how to use the land, the grid access, and so forth to bring through new projects. So I guess in a way that's a circular thinking that's being brought through, and we encourage that and very happy to see that. But Chris, perhaps just from your side in conclusion, what can we do as a sector? Are there sufficient resources from a point of view of the skills, the consulting services, the technologies? You mentioned many technologies. Do you feel that the solutions are available? Who are the best people to reach out to? I mean, should people reach out to people like the National Cleaner Production Center, for instance, based at CSIR? I mean, there's organizations like SAPVIA and SAWIR that represent the wind and energy sector. I mean, what's your advice to people who want to get going, who want to be a part of it? Which are the organizations, in your view, that are leading the way? And what's in conclusion, what would you like to see? What sort of future do you think we can have if companies adopt these sorts of approaches on a wide scale?
We need to educate ourselves, Gordon. There are a lot of organizations out there doing some amazing work, and you've mentioned a number of them. But people need to reach out. There's a lot of consulting organizations. You've got to be very careful when you're asking someone to put in a rooftop solar. Do your homework. Make sure that you've looked around, that you are testing against 2 or 3 different service providers. But there are some amazing consultants out there also who provide that level of advice to organizations in terms of the energy mix. So make reference to that. If you don't understand it yourself, get some support. It can save you a huge amount of money if you just do your homework. But look at the opportunity in terms of the sustainability of your organization. And this comes back to circular economy. Sustainability is the biggest component of that, is the financial sustainability of yourself and your company going into the future. So whether you're sitting at home saying, I'm getting annoyed because when the Sharks are playing, the electricity goes out and I can't watch my rugby, you need to have systems in place, like I do at home. I have inverters, I have solar systems. There are opportunities where I have light and I have cooking materials without having to rely on an unreliable grid. If you're an organization, you need to make sure that you are going to look towards the future. You need to decrease your energy costs over time and become more sustainable, so that when you are reporting to your consumers and to your shareholders, that you are being responsible. So it's the way to go. Anybody who's not doing it at the moment is going to be left behind. But we need to, again, get people to understand, look at the energy mix. We need to understand peak demands and base demands. We need to understand different types of energy inputs and look at the opportunities available to us and seek guidance. Not all of us can be experts. There's lots of clever people out there.
100%. And that's all we have time for today, folks. So I just want to say a super thank you to Chris, as always, and to Nolwazi, and of course to my colleague Byron. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking about circularity in relation to water. So it's all about how do we save water, how do we keep that water in use, how do we maximize the value and take advantage of that resource. So don't miss the show next week, same place, same time, with Chris, and we're hoping to have one or two guests as well in addition. So look forward to that, and we'll see you then. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye for now. How do we grow this influence of black leaders, men and women, that can represent our industry inside the ANC, inside the policy making structures?
Get to grips with the digital environment, put together best practices, what works and what doesn't, very importantly.
In the project that we're doing in Chaplat, we've created a linking bridge between those two little areas there. So it becomes a matter of just 10 minutes walk from one side to the other.
So my message to our CEOs and those chief investment officers is, where at the end of the day do you want to see your role?
So by treating all of our water back to a stage where we can bring it back into the process, we're in effect saving around about 35% of our water usage on site.